I was 52 when I learned that the daughter I raised wasn't mine, and the daughter who was mine had been raised by strangers I would never meet. And I learned it from the woman who made both things true, while she was dying in a bed I had made comfortable. My name is Rebecca. I'm a palliative care nurse in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I spend my days easing people out of this world, managing their pain, listening to their final confessions, their regrets, their secrets that have fermented for decades and now, finally, demand to be spoken. I thought I'd heard everything. I thought nothing could surprise me after 30 years of watching life reduce itself to its essential truths. I was wrong. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories. If you're new here, this is where we talk about the families we're born into, the families we build, and the terrible moments when we discover they're not the same thing. Subscribe if you've ever held a secret so long it became part of your body. Hit the bell. The next story might be the one you've been too afraid to tell. Here's my story. I grew up in a family where love was measured, weighed, and found insufficient. My mother, Dorothy, was the younger sister, the afterthought, the one who got the smaller bedroom, the hand-me-down clothes, the husband who worked in a factory instead of managing one. Her sister Margaret was the star, beautiful, ambitious, married to a doctor, living in a house with a name instead of just an address. Margaret had a son. Dorothy had me. And that, in the economy of our family, was the final accounting. I understood this early. I understood it in the way Margaret looked at me at family dinners, her eyes scanning my clothes, my posture, my grades, finding me adequate at best. I understood it in the way my mother flinched when Margaret mentioned her son's achievements, his private school, his acceptance to medical school. I understood it in the silence after Margaret left, the silence that filled with everything Dorothy couldn't say about her own life, her own choices, her own daughter who would never be enough to win. But I wasn't competing. That was the thing Margaret never understood. I didn't want to win. I wanted to escape. I wanted to build a life that didn't require comparison, that didn't measure itself against someone else's scorecard. I wanted to become the kind of person who didn't need to be the best because she was simply enough. I became a nurse. Not a doctor, that was Margaret's son's territory, the path of prestige and competition. Nursing was different. Nursing was about presence, about care, about the willingness to be with people in their most vulnerable moments without needing to fix them, to cure them, to claim their survival as your victory. I loved it. I was good at it. I found meaning in the work that Margaret's son, I suspected, had never found in his. And then, at 21, in my final year of nursing school, I got pregnant. The father was a mistake. Not a bad person, just a temporary one, a musician who played in bars near campus, who told me I was beautiful in a way that made me believe it for a while, who disappeared when I told him about the baby. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't even angry. I was practical. I finished my courses with my belly showing, graduated by the skin of my teeth and the kindness of professors who saw determination rather than irresponsibility, and prepared to become a mother. Margaret offered to help. That should have been my first warning. She was the nursing supervisor at the hospital where I'd been hired, the same hospital where I'd deliver. She had connections, she said. She could ensure I got the best care, the best room, the best outcome. She'd be there for the birth. She'd make sure everything was perfect. I should have asked why. I should have wondered what Margaret gained from helping the niece she'd never particularly liked. But I was young and scared and alone, and the offer of family support, even from Margaret, felt like a rope thrown to someone drowning. I called the baby Lily. I chose the name in my 7th month, whispering it to my belly at night, imagining the person she would become. Lily, like the flower that grows in difficult places, that pushes through concrete, that doesn't need perfect conditions to bloom. I wanted her to be resilient. I wanted her to be kind. I wanted her to be everything that our family wasn't. The labor was long. 30 hours of pain that Margaret managed with the efficiency of someone who'd supervised thousands of births, who treated my body as a system to be optimized, a process to be controlled. I remember fragments, the fluorescent lights, the beeping monitors, Margaret's face above me, professional and distant. I remember pushing and exhaustion and finally the cry that meant Lily had arrived, and then I remember Margaret telling me to rest. "You've done enough," she said. "Sleep, I'll bring her to you when you're recovered." I slept. I was young and exhausted and I trusted my aunt. When I woke, hours later, Margaret placed a bundle in my arms. A baby with a cap pulled low, wrapped in a hospital blanket, smelling of powder and newness. "Your daughter," Margaret said, "beautiful, perfect, just like her mother." I looked at the face. The cap covered most of it, but I could see eyes, a nose, a mouth that could have been anyone's. I felt the weight of her, the warmth, the absolute dependence that made something inside me shift permanently. I didn't question. I didn't examine. I simply loved. Lily grew. She grew into a child who was nothing like me, blonde where I was brunette, blue-eyed where I was brown-eyed, extroverted where I was quiet, charismatic where I was careful. I attributed it to her father, to the mysteries of genetics, to the recombination that makes each child a unique experiment. I never questioned. I never tested. I never considered that the differences might mean something else. Margaret watched. She visited more often than she had before Lily's birth, bringing gifts, asking questions, observing my daughter with an intensity I mistook for interest. When Lily was 5, Margaret gave her a locket, gold, expensive, engraved with an L that I thought stood for Lily. I learned later it stood for something else, for someone else. But I didn't know. For 30 years, I didn't know. Lily was 30 when I found out. 30, married, a child therapist with her own practice, the kind of person who helped children navigate the exact kind of family dysfunction I'd spent my life trying to escape. She visited every Sunday. She called me Mom with the naturalness of someone who'd never questioned the word. She was my daughter in every way that mattered, the person I'd fed and bathed and comforted, the person I'd sacrificed for and celebrated and worried about, the person whose existence had given my own meaning. And she wasn't mine. I learned it from Margaret. Margaret, dying of pancreatic cancer at 78, assigned to my palliative care unit by the rotation schedule I didn't control. Margaret, whose dementia had stolen names but not secrets, whose moments of lucidity were windows into a past she'd spent decades concealing. I entered her room on a Tuesday morning, routine check, vital signs, pain assessment. She looked at me with the confusion of someone who no longer recognized faces but still recognized uniforms, still understood that the person in scrubs held power over her comfort. "Nurse," she said. "The blonde one, how is she?" I thought she was confused, mixing me with another patient, another story. "I'm Rebecca, Mrs. Hale, your niece. I'm your nurse today." She laughed, a dry sound that turned into a cough. "I know who you are, I always knew, the blonde one, Lily, how is she?" The question struck me as odd, but dementia produces odd questions. "She's fine, she's doing well, she's a therapist now." "Good," Margaret said. "Good, she got the better family, the better mother, that's what I told them. I told them she'd have a better life with you." I paused in adjusting her Roman 4. Something in her tone, something in the specificity of her words, triggered a response I couldn't name. "What do you mean, Mrs. Hale? What did you tell who?" Margaret's eyes focused suddenly, the clarity of lucidity that comes and goes in terminal patients, the window opening before it closes forever. "The family who couldn't have children, the good family, the better family. I gave them your baby, the dark one, the one that looked like you. And I gave you mine, the blonde one, the one I didn't want, the one that would have ruined everything. I gave you Lily and I gave them your daughter, and I told myself it was better for everyone." The words entered my consciousness like a drug, slowly, then all at once. I felt my hands continue their work, checking vitals, adjusting medication, while my mind processed what she'd said. "Your baby, the dark one, the one that looked like you, I gave you Lily. I gave them your daughter." I didn't react. 30 years of nursing had trained me to receive terrible information without visible response. I finished my check. I noted her vitals. I walked out of the room. And then I went to the bathroom and vomited until my stomach was empty and my throat burned and my eyes streamed with something that wasn't tears because I didn't know how to cry yet. I didn't confront Margaret. Not that day. Not the next. I went home. I sat in my apartment, the apartment where I'd raised Lily, where we'd celebrated birthdays and mourned losses and built a life that felt real, and I tried to understand what I'd learned. Lily wasn't my daughter. My daughter, the dark-haired baby, the one who looked like me, was somewhere else, raised by strangers, living a life I'd never been part of. And Margaret, my aunt, my supervisor, the woman who'd helped me give birth, had orchestrated it all, had taken my baby and given me hers, had decided that her unwanted daughter deserved a better life, and that my wanted daughter deserved to be given away like a gift to strangers. I should have been angry. I was angry. But beneath the anger was something worse. The cold, creeping realization that I'd failed to protect my child, that I'd trusted the wrong person, that my entire adult life had been built on a substitution I hadn't noticed because I'd been too grateful for the baby in my arms to question her origin. I investigated. Not as a mother. As a nurse. I accessed records that shouldn't have been accessible, used connections that shouldn't have been used, traced a paper trail that had been deliberately obscured. The hospital where I delivered, Margaret's hospital, had lost records in a flood 10 years prior. But I found fragments. A transfer form unsigned for a baby girl, date matching Lily's birth. A complaint filed by a nurse who'd noticed confusion in newborn identification that night, who'd been terminated 3 months later for performance issues. A birth certificate for Lily Hale, Margaret's maiden name, not mine, that had been corrected 6 months after issuance. And I found a name. The Brennan family. Thomas and Patricia Brennan, who'd adopted a baby girl 30 years ago through a private arrangement facilitated by a hospital supervisor. A baby with dark hair and brown eyes, who grew up to be Claire Brennan, attorney, married, mother of 2, living in Chicago. I found Claire on social media. I looked at her photos, the dark hair like mine, the brown eyes like mine, the serious expression that I recognized from my own mirror, and I felt something break inside me. Not my heart, something deeper. The foundation of everything I'd believed about my life, my choices, my motherhood. I didn't contact her immediately. I didn't know how. What do you say to a stranger who is your daughter? What do you say to a daughter who is a stranger? Instead, I went back to Margaret. I didn't confront her with accusations. I didn't demand explanations. I simply sat by her bed, in my nurse's uniform, and I talked. I talked about Lily, about her achievements, about the woman she'd become. I watched Margaret's reactions, the flicker of possession, of victory, of satisfaction that her plan had worked, that her unwanted daughter had thrived in better circumstances, that she'd won even in this. And then I told her about Claire, not as my daughter. As a patient I'd heard about, a lawyer in Chicago, a success story. I watched Margaret's face change, the confusion of dementia fighting with the clarity of guilt. She was supposed to be happy. Margaret whispered, "The Brennans were good people, better than you, better than Dorothy. I gave her a better life." "You gave her away," I said, not angry, just stating fact. "You gave my daughter to strangers because you thought I wasn't good enough, and you gave me your daughter because you didn't want her, and you called that better." Margaret looked at me, and for a moment the dementia cleared completely. She saw me. She saw what she'd done. And she said, with the honesty of someone who has nothing left to lose, "I wanted to win, just once. Your mother always thought she was the good one, the kind one, the one who deserved love. I wanted to prove that I could give something better, even if it wasn't mine to give." I sat with that. I sat with the smallness of it, the pettiness, the decades of destruction built on a sibling rivalry that had nothing to do with me or my daughter or Lily. I sat with the fact that Margaret had destroyed 3 lives, mine, Claire's, Lily's, to win a competition that existed only in her mind. And then I made my decision. I contacted Claire, not as a mother, as a nurse who had cared for a patient with information about her birth. I sent documents, proof, the story without asking for anything. I told her I understood if she didn't want to know more, if she wanted to continue her life as it was, if the truth was too disruptive to bear. She responded in 3 days. Not with anger, not with rejection, but with the measured thoughtfulness I'd seen in her photographs, the careful consideration that mirrored my own. "I've always known I was adopted," she wrote. "My parents told me early, made it something positive, a choice made with love. But I never knew the circumstances. I never knew there was another mother, another family, another life I might have had. I don't want to replace what I have, but I want to understand, and I want you to understand that what happened to us wasn't your fault." We met in Chicago 6 weeks later. I took time off work, told Lily I was visiting a friend, lied for the first time in a relationship built on truth. Claire met me at a coffee shop near her office, professional, organized, the kind of person who scheduled emotional revelations with the same precision she applied to legal cases. She looked like me, not identical but unmistakably related. The same dark hair, the same serious expression, the same way of holding herself slightly apart from the world, as if always observing before engaging. We talked for 3 hours. About her childhood, loving, stable, everything Margaret had promised. About her parents, who had died 5 years ago, who had never known the truth of her origin, who had loved her completely. About her own children, a boy and a girl who had her eyes and her seriousness and her careful approach to the world. And about Lily. About the sister she'd never known, the life she'd never shared, the mother who had raised them both without knowing she was raising 2. "Don't tell her," Claire said finally. "Not yet, not like this. Lily is your daughter in every way that matters. Telling her now, without preparation, without her own choice, it would be another violation, another decision made for her by someone else. Let her come to it herself if she needs to, or let her never know if that's better." "But she's not my daughter," I said. The words hurt, but I needed to say them. Biologically, she's yours, Margaret's. She's yours, Claire interrupted. You raised her, you loved her. You were there for every milestone, every crisis, every ordinary day. Biology is information. It's not relationship. I have a mother. I had a mother. She was Patricia Brennan, and she was wonderful, and I don't need another. What I need, what I want, is to know you. Not as a replacement, as an addition. As someone who understands a part of my history that no one else can. I cried then. For the first time since Margaret's confession, I cried. Not for what I'd lost, but for what might still be possible. For the daughter I'd found, and the daughter I'd kept, and the strange, expanded family that might emerge from the wreckage of Margaret's manipulation. I didn't tell Lily immediately. I took Claire's advice, took time, tried to understand what I wanted from the truth before I forced it on someone else. But Margaret was dying. And Margaret, in her final lucid moments, was talking. To other nurses, to visitors, to anyone who would listen. The secret was leaking, spreading, becoming something that would reach Lily through channels I couldn't control. So I made a choice. I organized a family gathering, the first in a decade. I invited my mother Dorothy, Margaret's son, cousins I barely knew, the surviving fragments of a family that had been defined by competition rather than connection. I served tea. I made small talk. And then, with the same calm I used administering morphine, I told them the truth, not with accusation, with documentation. With records, with dates, with the evidence I'd compiled. I spoke without raising my voice, without crying, without the drama that Margaret would have expected from Dorothy's daughter. I simply laid out the facts and let them land where they would. The room fractured. Some couldn't believe that Margaret, difficult but respected, would do something so monstrous. Others, too late, remembered things they'd always suspected: Margaret's sudden interest in my pregnancy, her insistence on being present at the birth, her frequent visits to Lily that had seemed excessive even for a doting aunt. My mother, Dorothy, cried, not for me, I realized, but for herself. For the sister she'd competed with and lost to, for the moment she might have intervened and didn't, for the decades of silence that had allowed this to continue. But the moment that mattered was Lily. Lily, who had been in the kitchen during my revelation, who had heard everything through the open door, who emerged with eyes red and hands shaking and sat across from me on the porch where we'd spent so many evenings. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. Why did you let me walk into that room without knowing? Because I didn't know how, I said. Because I was afraid you'd look at me and not know who I was to you. Because for 30 years you were my daughter, and I didn't want that to change. She took my hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling, but her grip was firm. It doesn't change, she said. But now I know you chose me twice. Once when you raised me without knowing, and again when you decided to tell me the truth even though you might lose me. I held her hand and looked at the woman who wasn't my daughter, who was Margaret's daughter, who had been given to me like a consolation prize in a game I didn't know I was playing. And I felt, for the first time, that the biology didn't matter. That the choice mattered more. That 30 years of love created a bond that no substitution could break. I didn't sue the hospital. I didn't seek compensation for what I'd lost. What would money repair? Instead, I used what I knew to change what I could. I became an advocate for newborn identification protocols, speaking at conferences, writing articles, pushing for reforms that would make what happened to me impossible. Mandatory witnesses at every delivery, fingerprint verification for mothers, random audits of birth records. I testified before state legislators, telling my story without naming names, letting the system that had failed me become the system I would force to improve. Margaret died 3 months after the family gathering. I was with her, holding her hand, administering the final dose of morphine that would ease her out of the world she damaged so thoroughly. In her last moments, she looked at me with something that might have been recognition. The blonde one, she whispered. How is she? She's strong, I said. Stronger than you, stronger than me, because she never needed to win to be loved. Margaret's eyes closed. Her breathing slowed, and I sat with her until it stopped. The woman who had given me her daughter and taken mine, who had destroyed lives to satisfy a competition that existed only in her mind. I didn't forgive her. Forgiveness requires understanding, and I would never understand what made her capable of such cruelty. But I didn't hate her either. Hate requires energy I no longer had to give. I have 2 daughters now. 2 when I thought I had one. Lily remains my daughter in every way that matters. We talk more honestly now. Our relationship deepened by the truth we share rather than damaged by the secret we uncovered. She knows about Claire, has met her, is cautiously building a connection that might become sisterhood or might remain something else. She's still figuring it out. So am I. Claire is a friend, a confidante, a mirror that shows me what I might have been if Margaret hadn't intervened. We meet when we can, talk on the phone, share photographs of grandchildren who are related by blood but connected by choice. She has her own history, her own losses, her own mother who loved her completely. She doesn't need me to replace Patricia Brennan. She simply needs me to be present, to acknowledge what happened, to bear witness to a truth that was hidden for too long. Sometimes the three of us meet, me, Lily, Claire, and we talk about what family means when biology lies. We talk about the mothers who raise us, and the mothers who birth us, and the strange, complicated space where those roles diverge. We talk about Margaret, not with hatred, but with the puzzled sadness of people trying to understand damage they didn't cause. I never had a DNA test with Lily. I never needed confirmation of what I already knew, that 30 years of love creates a bond that no chromosome can define, that the choice to raise a child matters more than the accident of bearing one, that mothers are not those who give birth but those who refuse to let go. I'm Rebecca. I'm 52 years old. I'm a palliative care nurse, a mother of 2 daughters, a woman who learned that the family you build can survive even the most terrible truths. And if you've ever held a secret so long, it became part of your body, if you've ever discovered that love is stronger than the lies that try to contain it, this one's for you. See you in the next story.